Donald Trump's Ukraine should never have started the war comments that led our programme yesterday were off the cuff. Did he really believe that? After reflection, would he walk it back, as Americans say? Well, the answer to that question is no, absolutely not at all. In fact, he doubled down and said that Russia holds all the cards, and had some pretty damning words for Ukraine too. We've just been talking with the government minister about what next and what Western leaders can do, really, to lead Ukraine out of its current situation. President Trump thinks Zelensky is a freeloading, unpopular dictator. Let's try and work out what Mr. Trump is thinking. We're joined now by one of our favourite politics watchers who understands Trump as well as anyone, the Times columnist, Wall Street Journal's editor-at-large, Gerry Baker. Good morning.
Morning, Kate. I'm not sure I rejoice in that description, but we'll give it a go.
Well, look, our listeners will rejoice because we are trying to navigate this morning all of the very different perspectives on what's going on between Russia, Ukraine, America and everybody else at the moment. We just heard from Lisa Nandy, a government minister, and one of the questions we're left with is, do you believe that Donald Trump wants Ukraine to win this war?
I think the honest answer, Kate, is I don't really think he cares about Ukraine. Genuinely don't think it matters to him. And the reason I say that is I think he really is a politician, a political figure who has a kind of view of the world that we kind of haven't really seen, certainly not from an American president in a very, very long time, maybe not for a couple of centuries, which is he really does believe that what matters in the world is great power. And it's, in a sense, kind of in keeping with his personality and his character and indeed his background in real estate. It's about growing your own power, expanding your own reach, expanding your own wealth, both personally in his case and as a country. That's why he's talked about some of these things about expanding the US to take over Greenland or the Panama Canal. He really believes in that old-fashioned kind of 19th century great power idea. So I think he admires Vladimir Putin and Russia because I think he thinks Vladimir Putin sees the world in the same way. Vladimir Putin wants to expand Russia, wants to expand Russia's reach and indeed Russia's territory. And he has more respect for that than he has for a small country in the end, an insignificant country in the end, as tragic as its plight may be, to America, an insignificant country like Ukraine, or for that matter, rather more disturbingly, for British people and indeed for Europeans, what he regards as a weak, ineffective, and ultimately kind of meaningless European Union. He really does believe, I think, in as I say, in this idea that the world is essentially going to be run by powerful countries. He wants America to obviously to be the most powerful. He doesn't really have a kind of moral sense, as most other presidents have had, that the United States should use its power to help the weak, to help those who are facing, threats from other countries. He thinks that it's a competition between great powers, and that's what he wants to do.
And how much of this is being driven by Donald Trump's own emotions? Because, as Stig was saying earlier, we've seen a real escalation in the rhetoric from, the start of the week being quite sceptical about Ukraine to just an all-out blast at Zelensky last night. Very, very unusual in diplomatic terms. Not something I've ever seen before, certainly in the time I've been working in politics. Is this about emotions to some extent?
I think it is personal to some extent. I remember there's a little bit of personal history with Trump and Zelensky going back to his first term, obviously before the war, when Trump was convinced on the basis of no evidence whatsoever that Zelensky was somehow helping Joe Biden and it was somehow involved in some corruption involving Joe Biden, and it actually led to Donald Trump's first impeachment, a famous phone call he had where he seemed to be threatening Ukraine that if they didn't help him essentially politically with an investigation of Joe Biden, then he would withhold military support for Ukraine. That was back then. It should also be said, in Trump's defense, that military support did go through. And in fact, under Trump, the US supplied much more military support to Ukraine than it had done under Barack Obama. But I think there is an element of the personal about it. And I think, the way to really turn Donald Trump from an adversary, if you like, into an enemy is to get into a personal kind of fight with him. With Trump, a lot of politics is the personal, and I think probably when Zelensky said, after you describe it very, very aptly, the kind of the early exchanges earlier this week, and then when Zelensky described Trump as living in a bubble of disinformation, I suspect that was relayed to Trump, and he probably went overboard. But I think we really should, again, and again, as I say, always with Trump, that you can't ever extract his personality and his own kind of personal sensibilities from any issue. But I do think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the larger issue here is that Trump really just doesn't have any time for or interest in small countries that come to the United States asking for help in whether it's, as I say, whether it's military help in Ukraine or what he regards as in Europe as cheating. He believes that Europe cheats when it comes to economics. That's why it has a huge trade surplus with the US, or demanding that the US continue to supply, to be the major supplier to NATO's defense capabilities. He doesn't have any time for those weak. I think in a way, everybody's focused on this. There is this argument here that some people in the Republican Party is that we need to end the war in Ukraine because the big challenge really for the United States is China, not Russia. I'm not even convinced Trump really believes that. I think actually some of the things that Trump has said suggest he actually admires China too. He admires Xi Jingping, and that all fits more consistently, again, with this idea that he is a great power politician who sees the world in those terms.
Such a good point. Just finally, Gerry, there is a question about Trump's own reputation in America, how the American people feel. We've been talking a lot about how people here in the UK feel about the Prime Minister's actions on the programme today. How do people in America feel? What's the sense there? And crucially, the Republican Party. We've seen Nikki Haley. I know she's been critical in the past of Trump. She did vote for him, though, come out overnight and say these are Russian talking points. Is there a turn against Trump in any way, shape or form?
It's interesting. On the big issues so far, he's been in office now the second time for a month. On all of the issues he's focused on, he's really well on the side of public opinion. Tightening the border, controlling the border, deporting illegal migrants, that gets overwhelming support. Cutting government spending through the DOGE process. Not everybody necessarily likes the way it's being done, but that's very much a popular idea for Americans. They want to see a smaller government. Rolling back the woke agenda, he's on the side of 80% of Americans on that issue. For example, when a couple of weeks ago, when he held that signing ceremony to stop trans men from competing in women's sports, he's really on the popular side of all of these issues. I think on Ukraine, he's not. Frankly, Vladimir Putin, who he clearly seems to admire and respect much more than Zelensky, has an approval rating in the United States below 10%. Americans overwhelmingly support Ukraine and Zelensky on this. The only problem, Kate, is it doesn't really matter very much to them. It's those other issues, domestic issues, understandably, which they regard as very important. They give Donald Trump high marks for. Yeah. Even if they disagree with him on Ukraine, it doesn't have high saliency among the American people or even among American politicians. I think we'll see. There will be some pushback. There has already been a little bit of pushback for the first time from Republican members of Congress. So far, Republican members of Congress have gone along with pretty well every single thing Donald Trump has said and done. Just on this, we're starting to see some gentle, cautious rebuttals of what President Trump has said. But again, in the end, politically, it just is not that salient an issue. And I think that's one of the reasons Donald Trump, frankly, doesn't really care that much about it.
Yeah, and something we'll keep an eye on this side too. Gerry Baker, Wall Street Journal's editor-at-large and Times columnist. Many thanks.
Thank you.
So interesting next week, coming on the back of Nisa Nandi. Ukraine needs to win the war and the peace. Gerry Baker, Donald Trump doesn't care about Ukraine, which is what I think we've been saying on this programme all week. I really felt it was very, very interesting from Gerry Baker. I'm sure that's correct. He doesn't care that much either way.